Hi, my name's Matt Korba. I am the creative director at The Odd Gentleman, and we're here to talk about King's Quest Chapter 2. King's Quest is an adventure game series that is a classic game series that's been around for a very long time. They've done 8, and it was sort of one of the first adventure games. It was made by a company called Sierra that really pushed the boundaries of a lot of things in tech. So the game started off, it was one of the first graphical adventure games. You would type things in like eat carrot or jump, and Graham would perform these actions. All the way up to the modern point-and-click sort of style of interface. It's a story centered on a king and his family, and each of the different classic games you play as like somebody different in the family. And then we are doing the reimagined version of King's Quest, where the classic hero, King Graham, is now a very old man, and it really focuses on the stories of his past adventures that he shares with his curious granddaughter Gwendolyn. And based on the actions that the player performs in the flashback stories, Gwendolyn is sort of shaped differently and solves her problems in different ways. I had met with Activision before about different projects, but we never really found a match, and they asked us if we would like to pitch a new game for the King's Quest that they would be funding, if we would like to be the developers on it. King's Quest is my favorite game series of all time. I grew up playing the game with my uncle, and I was just nervous and excited but stoked. We were only 8 people at the time, so we were small, and they sent it out to a bunch of different studios, but it was awesome because in the end they chose us because they liked our creative pitch, which very rarely happens in the video game industry. They could have gone with a bigger studio, they could have gone with someone that shipped more games or maybe had more Twitter followers, but they knew that I was a big fan, and they came and met us and saw that I legitimately was a big fan. I always had my own internal pressures on myself, and then when we announced at the Game Awards, it just was like the snowball, just more and more pressure. And now Chapter 1 was well received and really good, so now there's even more pressure to just continue it to be good, and it's like the expectations go up, right? Chapter 2 is actually centered around fear and anxiety about Graham becoming king, and how he was a great adventurer, but now he has to rule a kingdom, and the struggles that are taking place in his mind. And so some of those feelings of anxiety we actually got to put in this chapter, which was really cool. We did want to do a chapter that was slightly darker. King's Quest, the classic games, always sort of had this nice balance between charming and silly and dark, and fairy tales have a very dark element to them as well. And so with this chapter, we wanted to try something that was a little darker. Like, Graham's also growing up, and it fit the themes of fear and anxiety that he's telling us. He's telling a story to Gwendolyn about basically how to face her fears, so it all made sense for this. The next chapter, we're not revealing really what it's about yet, but the way that we make it will shift for that specific story that he's telling in that chapter as well. This chapter is still funny, like we still have jokes in it, still a comedy, but it does have some more serious elements in it. And I think when you ask, well, how are people going to react? Hopefully they'll like it. I think King's Quest were always evolving, and so we want to always evolve this game as well. And some of the old the fans of the classic games like a lot that darker part of King's Quest a lot, so I think they'll really appreciate this chapter. When we got the original pitch, it was already decided that it was going to be episodic. Creatively, and for me personally, if we were just doing one big King's Quest, which maybe we'll do someday or maybe somebody else will do, it would have been a different game. I think the story that we want to tell really fits the format, because Graham's aging each episode. There's a new character model, there's new animations, that's just too much for one game. And I think it's going to be interesting because I think we really try to choose a story design-wise that would fit well in an episodic format, and we're not... A lot of games that are made episodically, it's really just one story, and they sort of pick a point, like an act break or something, to chop it up, and then it's to be continued. We're not doing that. We're basically making, 5 unique games plus an epilogue. And I think it's a challenge for us to do that, but I think it's going to be interesting to watch people take that break and then come back and see, oh, Graham's older now, like Daventry has grown, like characters now have gray hair, you're sort of aging as he ages a little bit. So I think the story that we chose to tell really fits the format really well, and it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. The decisions you made in Chapter 1 are still around, and they affect Chapter 2, and moving forward, we are pushing those decisions to each chapter. But because we're telling a complete story, we also resolve a lot more things per episode. Like in Chapter 1, we resolved, Acorn's story and Whisper's story, at least their story for that chapter, right? You saw their whole arc go from basically bully to friend. And then we left things that are still unresolved, like with Manny and things like that we'll be continuing to go to. And there was also some decisions that you made that you didn't quite see the full arc of, like whether you chose to save the merchant or not. And then we'll be playing with that stuff in Chapter 2. So we're kind of doing both. I've seen some episodic seasons where all of your decisions get resolved in the last episode and they really don't have an effect until then. And you can think of why, right? Because you don't want to keep branching the game until the very end of it. And I don't think we'll do something like that where you're constantly making decisions and you're not seeing any changes, and then all of a sudden at the end it's like this crazy branching moment. But we are carrying your decisions and making sure that they matter and changing episodes along the way. The first one, it was all just about figuring out what this game is, what technology are we using, how are we using this technology, and the tools just keep getting better and better now, so the content gets easier and easier to create. That said, we're constantly challenging ourselves and wanting to make new mechanics and new things that we always need new tech for, but nothing, I don't think anything will be as difficult as getting the first chapter up was, just for all the stuff we had to do from scratch. We worked with the casting director, his name's Eric Weiss, and us being a smaller studio but working with someone like Sierra/Activision, like they have the resources to get people in a VO session, and we had a casting call and we picked some people from that, and then other people like Christopher Lloyd we were more specific about, like we think Christopher Lloyd would be right for this role, or Zelda Williams, and they went out and asked them, and luckily pretty much everyone said yes. Sometimes on my casting I would have stuff like, this character kind of sounds like Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, and they said, well, why don't we just ask Richard White? And Richard White said yes, so he's in the game. So it was a really cool, fun process. It was a new process for our studio to go through something that large in the sense of VO casting and VO recording, but it's a fun VO. Whenever we're in session, like it's crazy, but it's fun. It's fun to hang out with the actors and riff on the script and come up with jokes. I keep mine in the fridge, unless we've stolen like the little packs from McDonald's, then those go into the drawer. Actually, I keep it in the closet until it's open, and then the fridge.